Madam Speaker, we in the NDP believe that financial literacy is a vital component of any consumer protection regime in Canada. Certainly, this motion contains some changes that would help protect Canadian consumers, but these recommendations, if accepted, would still only constitute, in our opinion, a small first step. It's our opinion that this government is not properly addressing consumer protection in general and financial literacy specifically, that this motion is even before the House. If the government had a real interest in pursuing these goals, it would not take a private member's motion from a member of the governing party to call the government to action. It is clear at this point that the entire process of the Minister of Finance implementing the Financial Literacy Task Force, in our opinion, is more about spin rather than substance. And since the task force reported back to the Minister, we've had 2 budgets presented to the House and multiple opportunities for standalone legislation, but instead of focusing on real changes that could help average Canadians, this government has been focused on an agenda which only seems to help well-connected insiders. A clear example of this government's failure to understand the issue of consumer protection is the voluntary code of conduct, which the Minister of Finance negotiated with the credit card issuers and the banks behind closed doors. The explicit purpose of the code completely ignores the needs of consumers, and vital policies which would have protected consumers are simply non-existent. And an NDP government would ensure that all the rules governing credit cards are mandatory, therefore ensuring that issuers, merchants, and consumers all know their rights and responsibilities, and ensures that consumers are properly protected. Madam Speaker, let us look at each of the 5 core pillars of this task force recommendations in turn. The first is shared responsibility. And while consumers certainly have a responsibility towards their own finances, it is important to note that a collective responsibility is not the same as equal responsibility. Take the global recession that started in 2008. This is commonly blamed on people taking on subprime mortgages. While each individual is responsible for their individual mortgage, it is the framework created by government and industry which allows this to take place on a huge and destabilizing level. Madam Speaker, government and the wider industry have a greater responsibility because it is they who must maintain the financial system as a whole. That is not to say that consumers should act recklessly, but there needs to be safeguards for the system as a whole. The second pillar is leadership and collaboration. Namely, a national champion who is accountable to the Minister of Finance. It certainly makes sense to have someone who is accountable for these policies, but the worry is that this simply adds another layer of bureaucracy to the system. The consumer protection regime in Canada is already spread between multiple agencies and departments, and adding this national champion could simply make the current system even more complex. As well, this champion needs to be a champion for consumers, not a champion for the banking industry's desires. It would be all too easy to appoint a member of the banking community who then simply bows to the industry. Moreover, the government needs to show leadership as well, trying to switch Canadians from guaranteed defined benefit pension plans to risky defined contribution plans hardly sends the right message to Canadians. Not only is this a bad message for Canadians, Madam Speaker, Canadians would be much better served in planning their personal finances if they accurately were able to predict their pension payments. The third pillar is lifelong learning. For sure, Madam Speaker, with the continuing changes in investment vehicles and payment methods, and right now in the Industry Committee we're studying mobile payments and e-commerce, and the differing requirements for Canadians at different points in their lives, Madam Speaker, lifelong learning is truly important. However, while the report talks of the foundations of lifelong learning, it misses the most important foundation, and one that is often missed too often, Madam Speaker. That without adequate numeracy and literacy skills, financial literacy education is often and unfortunately wasted. Any long-term effort to improve financial literacy, lifelong learning also needs to focus on improving basic education of Canadian children, as well as ensuring Canadian adults have access to courses to improve their numeracy and literacy skills throughout their lives. Otherwise, Madam Speaker, specific financial literacy curriculums are wasted. And that's one of the things that we're also speaking to, Madam Speaker, in the Industry Committee, is we have a need for financial literacy. And now comes digital literacy. And when those two combine, those who are being affected are those who not necessarily have the education to understand. We need to ensure that both digital literacy and financial literacy come together on this. And the fourth pillar is delivery and promotion, focusing specifically on public awareness and on a single source website, which is echoed in the Article B of this motion. Of course, ensuring that there is public awareness of financial literacy programs is an idea that we as New Democrats support. But again, moving to a new emphasis website for financial literacy could well end up being another level of confusion for Canadians. As my honourable colleague earlier mentioned, there's already the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada website that contains a number of useful tools for consumers. The problem is simply that people don't know where to look when they have consumer or financial issues. Sometimes they go to the FCAC website, the Office of Consumer Affairs website, or the Canadian Consumer Handbook. Adding a financial literacy website on top of this patchwork may not actually help consumers find information. What we need is to ensure that consumers have all the information they need in one place, not separated by what can appear to average Canadians as somewhat arbitrary departmental jurisdictions. And the final pillar is accountability, specifically to Parliament through an annual report, as well as requiring financial institutions to make their financial commitments to financial literacy projects public. It of course makes sense to monitor the outcomes of such a program, but as always we need to ensure that the monitoring techniques are objective and rigorous to ensure they are not open to political manipulation, Madam Speaker. As you can see from these pillars, there are obviously a number of shortcomings if we accept this report as the final step in achieving financial literacy in Canada. However, this small step is better than doing nothing. And I can assure you that I, as the NDP consumer protection critic, will continue to hold this government to account on the issue of financial literacy. We need to be a world leader in this area, and we will continue to push for a complete model of financial literacy, which includes ensuring that the specific needs of low-income Canadians are met, improved, and basic numeracy and literacy skills of all Canadians, and provide a level of CPP to ensure that Canadians can properly plan for their futures, Madam Speaker. This motion certainly does not meet all of the requirements for a full financial literacy program, but, Madam Speaker, it is a start. Thank you, Madam Speaker.